The Supreme Tribunal of Universal Justice stood like a monument to civilization itself, its quantum steel spires reaching toward the stars with an arrogance that only 10,000 years of galactic dominance could produce. Ambassador Thexnell adjusted his ceremonial robes and whispered to his aide, "In all my cycles serving the Confederation, I have never seen such a spectacle." The courtroom stretched before them like a cathedral of law, its bioluminescent walls pulsing with the steady rhythm of justice. Floating holo displays showed legal precedents from a million worlds, while gravity wells kept spectators suspended in perfect viewing positions. The air itself hummed with translation matrices, ensuring that every word would be understood by the 200 different species gathered to witness what the media had dubbed the trial of the millennium. Judge Korthak, his 6 arms draped in the ceremonial chains of his office, surveyed the crowd with compound eyes that had seen the rise and fall of entire civilizations. His voice boomed through the chamber's acoustic enhancers. "This tribunal will hear the case of Confederation versus Luna Blackwood, accused of..." He paused, mandibles clicking in what his species considered mild amusement. "Well, accused of crimes that our finest legal scholars insist are theoretically impossible." Prosecutor Velton stood at his podium, tentacles writhing with barely contained excitement. He had never lost a case in 3 centuries of practice, and today would be no different. The evidence against this primitive Deathworlder was overwhelming, processed through quantum computers that could analyze legal precedents faster than most species could think. Defense attorney Zafina sat at her assigned position, her crystalline form refracting the courtroom's lights into rainbow patterns. She had requested this assignment specifically, claiming that defending the impossible was the ultimate test of legal skill. Most observers assumed she was simply collecting what the humans called bragging rights before her inevitable defeat. The gallery buzzed with nervous energy as beings from across the galaxy leaned forward in their seats. Never before had a single member of that terrifying species called humanity faced the full might of Confederate justice alone. The betting pools had closed hours ago, with odds running 10,000 to 1 against the human. What none of them knew as they settled in for what should have been a weeks-long legal marathon was that they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change how the galaxy viewed those unpredictable creatures from the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. The trial was scheduled to begin at exactly 10:01 Galactic Standard Time. By 10:02 it would all be over. Then the security doors hissed open, and Luna Blackwood entered the chamber. Ambassador Thexnell blinked all 4 eyes in disbelief. That's the defendant? She was tiny, even by human standards. Maybe 5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in what humans called a ponytail, wearing simple clothes that looked like they came from a street vendor. No ceremonial robes, no bioenhancement suits, no neural interface crown. Just a 17-year-old human girl who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. "She destroyed 3 trade stations," whispered Counselor Brixtell, his scales rippling with nervous energy. "Crashed the Nexus Prime Stock Exchange. Caused a diplomatic incident with the hegemony that nearly started a war. And she did it all from her bedroom on some backwater colony world." Luna shuffled to the defendant's chair, hands in her pockets, looking around the magnificent courtroom like she was waiting for a hover bus. She yawned. Actually yawned, in the most important legal proceeding in galactic history. "Impossible," muttered Chief Analyst Korth, and, adjusting his probability calculators. "No single being could have bypassed our security protocols. The computational power alone would require a moon-sized quantum matrix." But there she sat, swinging her legs because the chair was designed for much larger beings, occasionally glancing at her primitive wrist chronometer with the expression of someone enduring a particularly boring lecture. The court's emotional sensors couldn't get a proper reading on her, their displays showing error messages in 17 different languages. "Humans," Senior Judge Vex Alta observed to her colleague, "are the only species that can look bored while facing a 1,000-year prison sentence." Defense attorney Zafina leaned over to whisper something to Luna, who just shrugged and nodded. The gesture was so casual, so utterly unconcerned, that several alien spectators felt their survival instincts activate. In their experience, the most dangerous predators were always the ones that looked completely relaxed. The girl from the Death World was either the most innocent being in the galaxy or the most terrifying. Unfortunately for everyone present, they were about to find out which. Judge Korthak activated the primary holo display, and the charges materialized in glowing text that stretched from floor to ceiling. Luna Blackwood. His voice resonated through the chamber. You stand accused of 47 counts of cyber terrorism, unauthorized access to Class Alpha secured networks, manipulation of interstellar commerce, and, he paused, mandibles clicking in what might have been confusion, creative interpretation of quantum encryption protocols. Prosecutor Veltan's tentacles writhed with satisfaction as he gestured toward the evidence matrix. Your Honors, the defendant allegedly penetrated security systems that have protected galactic infrastructure for millennia. Systems designed by the combined intellect of our greatest minds, protected by quantum barriers that exist in 11 dimensions simultaneously. The courtroom's AI began projecting testimonial holograms. Trade Administrator Quark's Neth appeared first, his usual composure replaced by what humans would recognize as shell shock. She somehow convinced our automated systems that all our trade agreements were actually elaborate poetry contests. 3 stations began judging cargo manifests based on artistic merit instead of economic value. Ambassador Thex now leaned forward, fascinated despite himself. The charges were indeed impossible. The Confederation's legal framework had been refined over 10,000 years, tested against every known form of intelligence in the galaxy. Their quantum courts could process evidence at subatomic levels, their AI judges could reference every legal precedent in galactic history simultaneously. This case should take 6 weeks minimum, legal scholar Prex Yan muttered to his companion. The evidence review alone requires analysis of 17 trillion data points across 43 different legal jurisdictions. Our probability matrices suggest a 99.97% conviction rate. Defense attorney Zafina stood gracefully, her crystalline form catching the light. Your Honors, my client wishes to exercise her right to cross-examine the evidence personally. A ripple of amusement passed through the alien spectators. Personal cross-examination was a legal technicality, rarely used because it required the defendant to understand complex legal frameworks that took most species decades to master. Luna looked up from examining her fingernails. Yeah, sure. Let's get this over with. I've got homework. The casual dismissal of the galaxy's most sophisticated legal system sent chills through the courtroom. At precisely 10:01 Galactic Standard Time, Judge Korthak struck his ceremonial gavel against the quantum resonance plate. The sound rippled through dimensions, officially beginning what every alien present assumed would be the most one-sided legal proceeding in galactic history. Prosecutor Veltan rose to his full height, tentacles arranging themselves in the traditional pattern of legal authority. Esteemed members of the tribunal, what we have before us today is not merely a criminal case, but a demonstration of why the Confederation's legal framework represents the pinnacle of civilized justice. The prosecutor's confidence was infectious. Spectators throughout the gallery nodded approval as he continued. The defendant, through means we can only assume involved primitive trial and error methods, has allegedly circumvented security protocols that incorporate 47 different mathematical principles, including several that her species hasn't even discovered yet. Holographic displays bloomed throughout the courtroom, showing network diagrams that resembled 3-dimensional spiderwebs made of pure light. Data streams flowed in colors that had no names in human languages, while quantum equations solved themselves in real time across floating screens. Those observe. Veltan announced with theatrical flair, the Nexus Prime Financial Network, protected by algorithmic barriers that regenerate every nanosecond, monitored by AI systems with processing power equivalent to small planets. Yet somehow, this primitive being allegedly convinced these same systems to reclassify all currency transactions as he paused for dramatic effect. Friendship bracelets. Laughter rippled through the alien audience. Ambassador Thexnell wiped tears from his eyes with all 4 hands. Friendship bracelets. Oh, these humans and their quaint concepts. The evidence continued mounting. Trade routes reorganized into smiley faces, military communications networks that began composing love poetry, diplomatic channels that started hosting recipe exchanges between previously hostile species. The prosecution will demonstrate, Velton declared, that these alleged crimes required computational abilities far beyond what any single organic mind could achieve. Therefore, the defendant must have had assistance from unknown technology, making this a case of interdimensional conspiracy. Luna had been quietly listening, occasionally glancing around the courtroom with mild interest. As the prosecutor's opening statement reached its crescendo, she raised her hand like a student in class. The gesture was so unexpected, so utterly mundane, that the entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Korthak blinked his compound eyes. "Yes, defendant?" Excuse me," Luna said, her voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustics, "but could I maybe see the actual code you're talking about? Like the real stuff, not just the pretty pictures?" The request was so simple, so innocent, that it took several seconds for the implications to register with the alien legal minds present. Defense attorney Zafina's crystalline form flickered with what might have been panic. "Your Honor, my client doesn't need to see the raw code. The holographic representations are perfectly adequate for—" No, Luna interrupted, still with that same casual tone that was beginning to unnerve the entire courtroom. "I mean the actual programming. The stuff that makes it work. Because looking at these pretty displays—" She gestured vaguely at the floating evidence matrices. "I'm getting the feeling that maybe nobody here actually understands what I supposedly did." Judge Korthak's mandibles clicked uncertainly. In 10,000 years of Confederate legal history, no defendant had ever requested to examine raw quantum code during proceedings. The request itself violated about 17 different protocols, but technically under subsection 2847 of the Legal Transparency Act, she had the right. "Very well," he rumbled. "Display the primary security algorithms." What happened next would be debated in legal schools across the galaxy for centuries to come. As the actual code materialized in the air above Luna's head, strings of quantum instructions that most aliens needed decades of study to comprehend, the human girl simply looked up, squinted for maybe 10 seconds, and then started to giggle. Not laugh. Giggle. Like she'd just seen something adorable. "Oh my God," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone that humans used when they found something both amusing and slightly embarrassing. You guys actually wrote all this security to prevent unauthorized access, right?" Prosecutor Velton's tentacles began writhing nervously. "Of course. The most sophisticated barriers ever devised." But Luna pointed at a section of the code. "You left the administrative override commands right there in the public documentation. Like literally right there. Anyone can see them." The courtroom fell absolutely silent. Senior legal analyst Court Hen leaned forward, his optical sensors focusing on the indicated code section. His voice came out as barely a whisper. That's not an override. That's the system architecture display function." "Yeah, exactly," Luna nodded enthusiastically. "Except if you read it backwards and change 3 characters, which any basic text editor can do, it becomes a root access command. See? You put the security keys right in the help files." Ambassador Thexnall felt his world tilting. "But that's impossible. Those algorithms were tested by our finest." "Testing against what?" Luna asked, still with that infuriatingly casual tone. "Other aliens who think the same way you do? Because I hate to break it to you, but you basically hung a sign that says, 'Please don't touch on a door,' and then put the key under the doormat with instructions on where to find it." The cascade began immediately. Chief Security Analyst Praxtel's workstation started flashing emergency warnings as automated systems began verifying Luna's claims. Within seconds, the courtroom's own security protocols began recognizing the vulnerabilities she'd pointed out. "Impossible," Velton whispered, his tentacles now writhing in full panic. "Our systems were designed by people who are really, really smart," Luna finished for him, "but who all think exactly the same way. That's not actually how security works. That's how you build a really elaborate house of cards." As if to prove her point, the courtroom's evidence management system chose that moment to crash, having detected the same logical flaws in its own architecture. The magnificent holographic displays flickered and died, leaving only the soft glow of emergency lighting and the sound of 200 aliens realizing that their entire legal framework had just been demolished by a bored teenager asking to see their homework. Judge Korthak's 6 arms flailed as he tried to process what had just happened. His compound eyes darted between the failing displays and the human girl who was now examining her fingernails again. This cannot be possible. Reactivate the evidence matrices. Run full diagnostic protocols. The court technicians scrambled over their workstations, but every system they tried to bring online immediately detected the same vulnerabilities Luna had casually pointed out. Warning klaxons began sounding as automated security protocols tried to patch holes that had been there for millennia, only to create new ones in the process. Your Honor. Prosecutor Veltan's voice cracked with desperation, his tentacles now writhing in patterns that suggested complete mental breakdown. I request immediate recess. The prosecution needs time to he stared at Luna, who waved at him cheerfully. I need to contact the Central Legal Authority. This human has somehow corrupted our evidence. Corrupted? Luna looked genuinely confused. I haven't touched anything. I just asked to see it. You guys did all the corrupting yourselves like 1,000 years ago, apparently. Ambassador Thexnal was frantically communicating with his staff through encrypted channels, but even those were failing as the security revelations cascaded through the station's networks. Sir. His aide whispered, the entire legal database is automatically updating its security protocols based on the human's observations. Half our case law is being reclassified as inadmissible evidence. Throughout the gallery, alien spectators broke into panicked conversations. Legal scholars who had spent centuries mastering Confederate law watched their life's work crumble in real time. Senior Judge Vex Alta was repeatedly slapping her emergency consultation button, but the AI legal advisors were all offline, desperately trying to patch their own vulnerabilities. Emergency session. Judge Korthak declared, his voice showing cracks in its usual authority. I'm calling an immediate consultation with the Supreme Legal Council. The holographic forms of the galaxy's most distinguished legal minds materialized around the judge's bench, but within moments, half of them flickered out of existence as their communication protocols succumbed to the same fundamental flaws Luna had identified. Chief Legal Advisor Morthak appeared for exactly 12 seconds before his connection died with a sound that translated roughly as, "Oh, sweet nebulae, we're all doomed, Your Honor." Defense Attorney Zafina said, her crystalline form now glowing with what might have been amusement, I believe my client has successfully demonstrated that the alleged crimes were not only possible but inevitable. Given the numerous security vulnerabilities that have apparently existed in Confederate systems since their inception. Luna raised her hand again. Does this mean I can go home now? Because I really do have homework, and it's actually harder than breaking your computer systems. The collective sound of 200 alien minds breaking was surprisingly quiet. While the courtroom's emergency systems continued their futile attempts at damage control, Luna stretched in her chair and looked around at the chaos with mild interest. You know, she said conversationally, this is actually pretty typical for human computer science students. We have a saying, the best way to secure a system is to let a bored teenager try to break it. Ambassador Thexnal felt his survival instinct screaming as he processed the implications. You mean there are more of you who can do this? Do what? Point out obvious security flaws? Luna shrugged. Yeah, basically every human who's ever taken a programming class. We're kind of taught to think about all the ways things can go wrong. It's like a game to us. Counselor Brixtell's scales had turned a pale shade that indicated existential terror. But our systems have protected galactic commerce for millennia. Wars have been fought over access to these networks. Yeah, that's really sad, actually, Luna replied with genuine sympathy. You guys built this amazing galactic civilization, but you forgot the most important rule of security. Just because something is complicated doesn't mean it's secure. Usually it's the opposite. The comment triggered something in the alien observers. Suddenly, the courtroom filled with horrified whispers as species after species began sharing their own encounters with human logic. I once watched a human solve a trade dispute by asking why we were fighting over resources that nobody actually wanted, Trade Administrator Corksneth whispered, his voice hollow. 30 years of negotiations ended in 10 minutes because he asked, "What if we just don't?" Military-attached Sax Thor nodded grimly. During the Proxima incident, our battle computers calculated 14,000 possible strategic scenarios. The human commander ignored all of them and won by doing something our computers classified as tactically impossible. They called it thinking outside the box. My cousin works in Galactic patent law, added legal clerk Nex Priel, her voice shaking. She says humans routinely file patents for inventions that violate known physics, then somehow make them work anyway. They call it innovation. Judge Korthak, still trying to process the legal nightmare unfolding before him, turned to address Luna directly. "Young human, do you understand what you have done here today?" Luna looked genuinely puzzled. "I pointed out that your security was broken? I mean, I figured you guys knew and just hadn't gotten around to fixing it yet. This is like freshman-level stuff where I come from." The phrase freshman level sent a new wave of panic through the courtroom. If this was what humans considered basic knowledge, what were their experts capable of? Senior Judge Vex Alta leaned over to her colleague. "We need to immediately classify all humans as a Class X unpredictable intelligence. Our entire legal framework assumes that defendants will think rationally." "But they do think rationally," Ambassador Thexnell protested weakly. "That's what makes them so terrifying. They use perfect logic, but they start from assumptions that nobody else in the galaxy would ever consider." Luna checked her chronometer again. "So am I free to go? Because this has been fun and all, but I really wasn't kidding about the homework thing." The casual dismissal of galactic legal proceedings as fun was perhaps the most chilling statement anyone in the courtroom had ever heard. Judge Korthak stared at his ceremonial gavel, which had presided over thousands of years of legal proceedings, and realized it had just become a historical artifact. His 6 arms moved with the weight of inevitability as he raised it one final time. "Given that the prosecution's evidence has been fundamentally compromised by the defendant's observations," he said, each word falling like a stone into still water, "and considering that our legal framework appears to require immediate and comprehensive revision, this tribunal has no choice but to dismiss all charges against Luna Blackwood." The gavel fell at exactly 10:02 Galactic Standard Time. In the media gallery, reporters from across the galaxy frantically tried to compose headlines that would make sense to their audiences. "Local girl breaks galaxy" seemed too simple. "Confederation legal system revealed as elaborate prank" felt too inflammatory. "Human child accidentally destroys 10 millennia of jurisprudence" was probably closest to the truth, but no editor would believe it. Luna stood up, stretched again, and slung a simple backpack over her shoulder. "Thanks, everyone. This was actually pretty interesting. You guys should maybe hire some human consultants to look at your other systems, though. I bet they're all broken in similar ways." The suggestion that their entire technological civilization might be fundamentally flawed sent fresh waves of panic through the remaining aliens. Several species representatives were already placing emergency calls to their home governments. "Oh, and Judge Korthak?" Luna turned back as she reached the exit. "You might want to check your courtroom's life support systems. I noticed some recursive loops in the atmospheric processors that could probably be exploited pretty easily." With that cheerful observation, she walked out of the most prestigious legal venue in the galaxy, leaving behind 200 of the most sophisticated minds in known space to contemplate their mortality. Ambassador Thexnell turned to his aide, his voice barely a whisper. "Make a note for the official record. Humans are not just unpredictable. They are unpredictable in ways that we cannot predict. Sir? They think around corners that we don't even know exist." They solve problems by ignoring the rules that define the problems. They are the only species in the galaxy that considers our greatest achievements to be interesting puzzles rather than insurmountable barriers. Through the courtroom's panoramic windows, they could see Luna's transport preparing for departure, taking her back to whatever backwater colony world had produced this casual destroyer of civilizations. "Gods help us all," Thexnell murmured. "There are billions more of them out there." Within a week, the trial that lasted 61 seconds had become the most studied legal case in galactic history. Law schools across 17 sectors added mandatory courses titled Human Logic and its applications to universal jurisprudence. Though most professors admitted they had no idea what to teach, the Confederation quickly established the Luna Doctrine, which mandated that any legal case involving a human defendant must include at least 3 human consultants on the prosecution team. Several species went further, with the Regellian Empire requiring their entire legal system to be reviewed by human computer science students before any major cases could proceed. Trade Administrator Corksneth found himself appointed to head a new department, the Office of Deathworlder Security Assessment. His first official act was to hire a dozen human teenagers to please break everything we own before someone else does. Within a month, they had identified vulnerabilities in systems that the Confederation's finest minds had considered mathematically perfect. Meanwhile, Luna returned to her life on the colony world of New Saskatchewan, completely unaware that she had fundamentally altered galactic civilization. She turned in her homework on time, complained about the cafeteria food, and spent her evenings playing video games that her classmates didn't realize were more sophisticated than most alien military simulations. Her only comment about the trial posted on her social media feed read, "Went to court today. Kind of boring, but the architecture was cool. Got out early though, so managed to catch the new episode of Cosmic Rangers. Pretty good day overall." The post was immediately classified as a state secret by 14 different governments. Ambassador Thexnell, now serving as the Confederation's first Director of Human Affairs, kept a framed picture of Luna on his desk. Not as inspiration, but as a reminder. Underneath it, he had written a quote that was already spreading through diplomatic circles across the galaxy: "Humans do not break the rules. They reveal that the rules were already broken, and we were just too afraid to look." In academic circles, the trial became known as the Blackwood Revelation, spawning entire fields of study dedicated to understanding human thought patterns. Philosophers spent years analyzing how a species could evolve to consider fundamental assumptions as merely starting points for negotiation. But perhaps the most telling change was in the galaxy's emergency protocols. Every Confederate starship now carried what became known as a human kit, containing items that most aliens considered completely useless: duct tape, paper clips, rubber bands, and a note reading in case of impossible problem. Give these to nearest human and stand back. Because if there was one thing the galaxy had learned from Luna Blackwood, it was that humans had a disturbing tendency to make the impossible look easy, usually while complaining that they had better things to do.